It is my distinct pleasure to extend a warm welcome to you all to our discussion on the way forward. Before proceeding further, I would like to inform the working group about the organizational arrangements for the meeting. This informal meeting is held using remote simultaneous interpretation. I kindly ask participants to be mindful of the additional difficulties experienced by interpreters when working remotely and of the increased likelihood of disruptions to the audio feed to the interpreters. Participants may select the preferred language to hear the interpretation, or choose the none option to hear the original language. Participants will not be able to unmute their microphones or engage their video unless given the floor. When called upon to speak, the participants will receive a message saying that their streaming is approved. Please press the video button appearing in that message in order to share your video and audio. If you face audio or video issues during the meeting, please use the Restart All Lines button above the hand icon. Should the problem persist, please reload your browser. As I said, it's an honor for me to chair this meeting and to have you attending this very special meeting. Following 3 days of intense discussions where we shared practices, ideas, and reflections, the 11th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging is taking place at a time when we are marking the 10th anniversary of the establishment of the Open Working Group on the eve of the 20th anniversary of the Madrid Plan, and also after the entire world has confronted the COVID-19 pandemic with a huge impact on the lives of adults and especially older adults. 10 years ago, the General Assembly of the United Nations, through its resolution 65/182, adopted by consensus on the 21st of December of 2010, decided to establish an open-ended working group in which all member states of the United Nations could participate with the purpose of enhancing the protection of human rights of older persons by examining the current international framework in human rights for older people and determining its possible gaps and deficiencies and the best way of remedying them, including through the study, where appropriate, of the viability of new instruments and measures. During these 10 years, the working group has covered a long path with achievements, obstacles, and major challenges. Throughout these 10 years, the group has debated, analyzed, and reflected on the existing gaps in the international legal framework and on the need and the viability of an international legal instrument, an integrated, a comprehensive one that specifically addresses the existing deficiencies in the protection of human rights of older persons. In 2012, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 67/139, which decided to transform the open-ended working group into an ad hoc committee open to participation by member states and observers to consider proposals for an international convention that will be comprehensive and to promote and protect the rights and dignity of older adults. However, that resolution was voted in the plenary of the General Assembly, and it was adopted as Resolution 67/139 by 54 in favor, including my country, 5 against, and 118 abstentions. Furthermore, the proposal to have a document of so-called recommendations at the end of each session of the working group, which was submitted at the time by the chair of the group during the 9th session in 2018, and then it was reiterated in the 10th session, suggested revitalizing the work of the working group, and this document of recommendations would not be binding. It would be based on consensus of member states. It would be agreed on in the interim between sessions, and it would be approved at the 11th session of the working group. This proposal was included in Resolution presented by G77 and China during in the third committee and adopted by consensus in December of 2019. That resolution contemplates, and here I quote, consider the possibility of adopting at each session recommendations negotiated at the intergovernmental level, which would be submitted for consideration by the General Assembly. The process of negotiation of a draft negotiations that was begun in February of 2020 was characterized by an extensive debate of various divergent positions by member states with regard to the viability of this process. And that process had to be interrupted due to the spread of COVID-19. Historically, the work of this working group has been guided by consensus building based on exchange of information, debate, transparent and inclusive discussion among member states, civil society, experts, and all of the relevant stakeholders. Up to now, given that in spite of various proposals being put forward, there hasn't been an agreement on the path forward. 2020 was marked by the COVID-19 pandemic and has been a turning point, which highlighted and exacerbated structural inequalities among persons and countries, but also it has highlighted the gaps in protection of human rights of older persons in the international sphere. Now, the Secretary General affirmed that the lack of a specific legal framework agreed at the international level contributes to the vulnerability of older persons and at times could have contributed to inadequate responses to the pandemic. So bearing that in mind, the Secretary General also recommended developing stronger legal frameworks at the national and international level to protect the human rights of older adults, including by accelerating the efforts of the working group of the General Assembly to put forward proposals for an international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights and dignity of older persons. The aging of our population is a universal phenomena. People are living longer, and all regions will see an increase in their older population between 2020 and 2050. By 2050, it is envisioned that the number around the world of older persons will double, and I'm sure that each one of us knows an older adult who has lost their lives, or who has been made invisible, or who has been a victim of ageism during the pandemic. Now, the campaign of the United Nations against ageism, launched in March of this year, indicated that 1 out of every 2 persons is discriminated based on age. And the figures show us that half the world is discriminated due to age. The COVID-19 crisis demands us urgently to ensure the full protection and upholding of the human rights of older persons. It's a universal challenge, and hence it is fundamental to work together to address it. The joint interregional declaration in support of the policy report of the Secretary General on the impact of COVID-19 on older persons, endorsed by 146 member states and observers in the United Nations in May of 2020, is a clear example of how member states can, through joint action, demonstrate their strong commitment to the promotion and protection of the rights of older persons. We have covered a very long road, but we have still long to go. The consensus is an essential requisite to have a strong basis to build on. Consensus has always guided the work of the working group since its creation. However, the working group also has a responsibility, and that responsibility, in addition to consensus, that responsibility specifically is older persons. So I'd like to hear all your views. Let's take this. Let's make this turning point an opportunity to reflect and debate on what will be the best path to follow to strengthen and revitalize the work of the working group and to comply with its mandate. The future is today. We have a great responsibility to reimagine and rethink a new world where those who are most forgotten are put at the forefront. Thank you very much. I now open the floor for comments. I encourage you to keep your interventions short and focused and to refrain from reading prepared statements. Now, the time limits are 3 minutes for national statements and 5 minutes for the statements on behalf of the group of states. Now, the 3-minute time limit also applies to statements by national human rights institutions and non-governmental organizations. Participants wishing to take the floor are requested to click the link to the inscription form. The Secretariat will now post the link in the chat box. In fact, it's been there for several minutes now. I would like to remind participants that they will not be able to unmute their microphone or engage their video unless given the floor. When called upon to speak, the participants will receive a message saying that their streaming is approved. Please press the video button appearing in that message in order to share your video and audio. Should you experience any technical difficulties when sharing your video and audio, we will attempt to give you the floor again at a later point. A technical focal point will reach out to you. Very well. I have the pleasure of giving the floor to the representative of Austria, Mr. Christopher Ansted. Could the chair please mute her mic?
And can you hear me? Did it work? Is everything working? Yes? Can you hear me? Okay. So thank you, Madam Chair. Austria aligns itself with the statement made on behalf of the European Union. We congratulate the Chair, the Bureau, as well as the Secretariat for the successful conduct of this year's session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, despite the difficulties due to the COVID-19 pandemic and its linked technical challenges. We have heard numerous outstanding presentations and interventions from member states, NGOs, NHRIs, and on the focus topics rights to work and access to the labor market and access to justice. Among others, these topics are key factors for social coherence, including reducing poverty and ensuring autonomy and independence of older persons, especially between generations. Austria, therefore, has a high interest in learning from others' best practices, but also in sharing our experiences. In one side event, we also had the chance to discuss a revision of the 2012 analytical outcome paper of the OHCHR on normative standards in international human rights law in relation to older persons. We would like to thank our co-organizers, Germany, Slovenia, and Chile, as well as the OHCHR, the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, and the WHO. One very important finding was that the current human rights framework is not sufficient to close existing and new arising normative gaps. In 2021, ageism is still not recognized as it should be, and the COVID-19 pandemic works as an amplifier for these deficiencies. In order to meet up with these developments, Austria suggests to give this updated analytical outcome paper more attention at the 12th session of the Open-Ended Working Group and to discuss it in depth with our colleagues and the civil society representatives. Additionally, we welcome the idea of a roadmap for the working group and are open to discuss how such a document could support our work at this group. We look forward to continuing our efforts for the human rights of older persons and are eager to return next year to hear and learn more from others' experiences. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the representative of Austria for your statement, and I now give the floor the representative of Argentina, Dr. Monica Roque. Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning to everyone. We have been examining the difficult situation and the lack of rights of older persons over the past few days, and the Republic of Argentina would like to propose that administrative measures should be taken to put before the General Assembly to establish a contact group. We know that NGOs have put forward a petition to begin work on examining the situation of older persons and the viability of having an instrument. We are trying to define how to move forward, and Argentina would like to suggest that administrative measures taken so that the General Assembly approve the establishment of a contact group. So it'll make it possible to have an in-depth analysis of what is taking place with older persons, what is taking place with the instruments that are supposed to defend their rights, and then, based on that, can take a decision whether a legally binding instrument is necessary or not. We all know that during the pandemic, it was the older persons who have suffered the most. We all know that we need instruments that can protect them. We understand that what we have at the national level is insufficient. It's important to make progress, and Madam Chair, you touched upon this, and the proposal of Argentina is to move forward in a way that protects the rights of older persons, and that not leaving anyone behind as claimed by the 2030 agenda. Today, we have seen that older persons have been left behind. We have seen that the measures taken by member states have not been sufficient, and I request all states, both developed and lesser developed states, that together we can develop an instrument that truly protects the human rights of older persons. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much to the representative of Argentina for your intervention. Now, the next speaker is the representative of Germany. Representative of Germany.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Germany aligns itself with the EU statement. Well, this afternoon we come to the end of intensive 4 days during which we dealt with the COVID-19 crisis and its impact on older persons, the issues of access to the labor market and access to justice for older persons, and the obstacles they might face. As always, the side events brought more light into the challenges we face and which inspire our work. I would like to grasp the opportunity to thank the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for the working paper for this working group called Update on the 2012 Analytical Outcome. We all had the opportunity to take part in yesterday's side event and get more insight into the study. Germany, together with Austria, has co-founded this update of the 2012 study. I think the comprehensive analysis of this new study will serve as a good basis for further deliberations and give us guidance to fulfill our mandate on identifying possible gaps in the case of relevant findings. give us the opportunity to discuss ways how to close them. Therefore, I suggest that during the 12th session of the Open-Ended Working Group in 2022, we will dedicate one agenda item to the discussion of this study and the identification of possible gaps in the international human rights system for older persons, and if there are gaps, the development of adequate responses to close them. Germany will support this move. Rumors have it, and Argentina talked about it, that some member states and NGOs are planning on taking the initiative and draft a proposal on how to close the gaps that have been identified so far by the discussions in the working group. This will be another piece in the puzzle. Furthermore, Germany expects to have an outcome paper of the upcoming 12th session of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Muchísimas.
Thank you very much to the delegation of Germany. Now, and thank you for your contributions. I just want to make a comment in reaction to what Austria and Germany have said. After the working document, one of the members of the Bureau, Portugal, asked that this document be made available to the whole membership on the website. And so member states, whether they belong to the working group or not, the revised 2012 document is now available and can be consulted and analyzed, of course, and discussed. Thank you very much to Austria and Germany. I now give the floor to the Holy See. Friedrich Hansen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? Excellent. The Holy See is most grateful to Your Excellency for dedicating time on this last day of the session to discuss the way forward. And we very much thank you for your initial presentation. That was very helpful. The discussions during these days and the substantive inputs presented by member states for this session confirm the importance of this body for the international community. In its intervention during the general discussion, the Holy See gave voice to its continued care, concern, and attention to the elderly. And that statement has already been distributed. A question before the working group since its establishment has been the feasibility of further instruments and measures. The Holy See is in no way convinced that elaborating a new human rights convention on the elderly at this time is opportune or that it would be helpful. Discussions on human rights in international fora, on their scope, meaning, and protection are, as we all know, complex, often difficult, and repeatedly unmask substantive disagreements among states. Launching negotiations on a new legal instrument without a solid basis, including an understanding on gaps and the situation on the ground for the elderly, and broad agreement on the way forward could easily contribute to further fragmentation of the human rights regime through the creation of multiple specialized sets of new and competing rights. In this regard, we welcome your important comment on consensus, the value of consensus, and the challenges when that is absent. Therefore, at this stage, the most effective way for the working group to fulfill its mandate is to ensure that the rights already extant in international law are fully promoted and assured at all stages of life. That being said, my delegation has taken due note of the working paper prepared by the Office of the High Commissioner, which will be studied attentively. Linked to the question of a new legal instrument is the question of intergovernmentally negotiated recommendations. GA Resolution 74-125 is not prescriptive on the adoption of such recommendations. It does not decide that such recommendations have to be adopted. Rather, the text of the resolution encourages member states to fulfill the working group's mandate by considering adopting, at each session, intergovernmentally negotiated recommendations to be presented for consideration by the GA. It must be noted that this is one of several possible courses of action. To this day, open, transparent, and inclusive discussions have not been held within the context of the working group to actually consider the merits of moving forward on such recommendations. The Holy See believes that moving directly to draft recommendations would most likely lead to continued discussions on the procedural standing of these and make their impact limited at best, if not counterproductive. So with that, I thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much to the Holy See. And let's recall the original words: consensus with responsibility. Consensus is important, of course, but responsibility as members of open-ended working group on aging, and given the major crisis of COVID-19, also must be kept in mind. Thank you very much. Now we're going to give the floor the NGO Help Age International, Madam Bridget Islip.
Thank you, Chair. Help Age International would like to thank you, the Bureau and the Secretariat for your efforts in convening this session, despite the technical challenges. We very much hope we will be able to meet in person at the 12th session. Just under a year ago, when calls to cull older persons were in the media and egregious violations of rights in care homes and discriminatory age-based restrictions of rights were fresh in our minds, 146 of you, member states, committed to promoting and respecting the rights of older persons. This week, only 8 member states took part in the interactive discussion on COVID-19. Despite the UN Secretary General's call to action to accelerate progress towards an international legal instrument, despite the priority given to a new convention by the public in the UN 75 consultation, only 2 member states took part in the interactive discussion on normative elements. This lack of engagement fails older persons everywhere, today and in future generations. As the 394 civil society organizations of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People said in our opening statement, to fail to act now is inexcusable. But we have heard that there are member states who are ready to act. The working paper by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights provides you with unequivocal evidence gaps in the existing system. 10 years of this working group provides you with the substance and the normative content to start drafting the main elements of an international legal instrument as your mandate requires you to do. The time has come to fulfill that mandate and set up a multi-stakeholder group of human rights experts from member states, civil society, and national human rights institutions, as well as the independent expert on the rights of older persons and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Wherever this multi-stakeholder group sits, in New York or Geneva, it should focus on drafting the main elements of a proposed international legal instrument and report to the 12th session of this working group. As an older man from Jordan said, it's as if we were dead. We have no rights, we're not recognized, our opinions are not respected, and we're not being heard. It's time for that to change. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you for your intervention, Bridget. Now we're going to give the floor to the NGO Age International, Mr. Ken Bluestone.
Gracias. Yo no puedo escucharlo. No.
I can't hear you. Mr. Bluestone, let's move on to the next speaker, and then we'll come back to you. In 3 minutes or a little more, we'll come back to you. So we're going to give the floor to the European Union. Tisvi Ekmekzoglou.
Yes.
Señora, la señora.
Yeah, thank you, and for pronouncing my name. Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the European Union and its member states, I would like to thank you and the Bureau and the Secretariat, as well as the panelists, for this session that proved to be fruitful despite the extremely challenging times we are living.
A ver si tenemos traducción.
We welcome the active participation of the civil society in the debates, their contribution being essential in informing the deliberation of the working group. So, Madam Chair, the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the lives and rights of older persons has been a prominent part of our discussions at the session of the working group. Nobody could escape the negative consequences of this ongoing global crisis, and those in the most vulnerable situation, namely older persons, have been particularly affected. We must, as you said, ensure better protection for those who are most at risk. In this session, we learn about ideas to move forward, promoting the human rights of older persons in this very specific situation. The EU and its member states have been active participants in these discussions. The two focus areas, access to justice and right to work and access to labor market, allowed us to devote our attention to two crucial issues affecting older persons, and the panels provided a good platform for a constructive exchange. We agree that continued learning at all ages keeps individuals active and employable, even if they're in their advanced years. Lifelong learning and acquiring and updating skills form parts of the response to the challenges of aging, and is indeed one of the elements of an active and healthy aging. Growing participation of older persons in the labor market and longer working lives can mitigate the problem of an aging society with a shrinking working age population. At the same time, the learning and training needs of older persons can be addressed at an intergenerational level, creating synergies with younger persons entering the job market. Older persons and younger persons' contributions as complementary rather than replaceable. Madam Chair, the EU acknowledges the serious challenges that older persons face, including when it comes to ensuring the full enjoyment of their human rights. We agree that more needs to be done to improve the situation of older persons to make their special needs more visible and strengthen the protection of their human rights through a more effective implementation of the existing human rights instruments. A better mainstream and raising awareness of the human rights of older persons through several UN mechanisms is needed. I give examples: the UN agencies to regularly apply an age lens with due consideration of intergenerational fairness through several UN mechanisms may be an efficient way of action. UN human rights special procedure mandate holders and treaty bodies could be encouraged to more systematically include the right of older persons in their agenda and work. The UPR, the Universal Periodic Review process, could also be used and utilized for addressing challenges of older persons, and protection of the rights of older persons should be considered in the context of an overall assessment of the human rights situation in each and every country. Better integration of the country's experience in advancing the human rights of older persons into the relevant global forums and agendas is needed. In this sense, we would like to once more express our full support to the mandate of the independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. As a follow-up, we agree also that we must continue our work by analyzing the outcomes of our meeting. The working paper prepared by the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights update to the 2012 analytical outcome study on the normative standards in international human rights law in relation to older persons, provides a valuable analysis and an excellent mapping of the situation. It should be our base for further discussion in the upcoming sessions. While identifying possible problems, we could think about suitable human rights-based remedies to address them, as well as possible ways of monitoring progress by making them better use of the different UN instruments, as I already said. Consulting with older persons on their specific risks and ensuring their meaningful participation in decision and policy making is, of course, essential. Madam Chair, the past year has taught us a hard lesson. We must face a clear evidence of how much still remains to be done in order to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. The heavy toll the pandemic has taken on older persons show us that we cannot build an inclusive, age-friendly and resilient society without addressing the needs and ensuring the full enjoyment of human rights of all its members. Having listened to a large number of interventions and today's as well discussions, our understanding is that there is a pressing need for improvement of the protection and promotion of rights of older persons. The EU is convinced that we all must do our best to ensure that the constantly growing number of persons of advanced age should be able to enjoy human rights and fundamental freedoms fully and effectively. Our societies can all benefit from this knowledge, skills, and wisdoms of our old citizens. I thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias a la...
Thank you very much to the representative of the European Union. Before giving the floor to the National Human Rights Institute of Poland, Madam Anna Czabiera, I would like to just remind you to stick to the time limit, because it's very important for everyone to have a chance to speak, and so no one be left behind in terms of speaking time. Anna, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor today. Madam Chair, Excellencies, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the session on behalf of the Commissioner for Human Rights of Poland, and I would like to express my gratitude to all member states who actively engage in the debate on the protection of human rights of older persons. I appreciate each conclusion formulated on behalf of the member states, which highlighted the need for strengthening the legal protection of the rights of older persons and indicating that the gaps exist and there's a need to commence work on addressing and closing them. Madam Chair, in the opening panel held on the first day of the session, Ms. Ilse Brands-Keris, Assistant to the Secretary General for Human Rights, indicated the need of the roadmap, and it was also indicated by the member states and others during today's session. And on behalf of the Commissioner for Human Rights of Poland, I endorse this suggestion. And I believe that creating a subgroup of the working group, be it a formal advisory committee or informal task group, would be of crucial importance on this road to the fulfillment of the OEGA mandate. This subgroup of the working group could include experts, as it was already said before, also from the member states, civil society organizations and HRIs, and of course independent experts to assist the working group during the intersessional period. It would be really great to include the well-known already update report of prepared by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to the official work for the next session of the OEGA. I believe it will be really contributing and assuring the highest quality of further reflections of the group. Madam Chair, I believe that it is really a time and for drafting a new convention on the rights of older persons. And the convention would be a game changer, not only would save lives, but significantly contribute to the well-being and the dignity of every man and woman, regardless of their age. I thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the distinguished delegate of Poland, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom, Madam Megan White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United Kingdom would like to thank all panelists, states, and civil society for their contributions during the session of the open-ended working group. As our discussions this week attest, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought the human rights of older persons into sharp focus, and it is right that we consider the international framework that seeks to protect and promote those rights. We welcome the Secretary General's policy brief on COVID and older persons, particularly its clear message that our response to COVID must respect the rights of older persons. The UN Global Report on Ageism and the OHCHR paper presented in advance of this session are well noted and merit careful and thorough consideration. We further note the Assistant Secretary General's words at the start of this week. The United Kingdom is supportive in principle of an instrument dedicated to the human rights of older persons, and we continue to welcome the work of the open-ended working group in helping us understand the key issues. We are open to considering further intersessional discussions in support of the working group mandate. Thank you.
I'd particularly like to thank the delegate from the UK, Madam White. Particularly like to thank her. And now we're going to go back to an NGO that could not take the floor, Age International, Mr. Ken Bluestone. Ken, can you try to take the floor now?
Madam Chair, can you hear me now?
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I would like to begin by recalling that the full title of this working group is For the Purpose of Strengthening the Protection of the Human Rights of Older Persons. We are pleased by the commitment expressed by member states for achieving this purpose, but we're disappointed that most member states and observers did not contribute to the substantive discussions in this session dedicated to this end. We would like to acknowledge and thank those member states that did. The lived experience of human rights abuses against older persons over the past 12 months in response to COVID-19 and the multitude of abuses and ageism that older persons have experienced over the many years before the pandemic requires a response. One of the most powerful tools the UN has at its disposal for ensuring the rights of older persons are protected is a legally binding Universal Human Rights Convention. It is right and appropriate for governments to exercise due diligence before taking such a step, but after 10 years of discussions and deliberations, it is now time for member states to act. We take task with the suggestion that we do not know enough already. The evidence produced by the UN Global Report on Ageism and the OHCHR working paper that was submitted to this session, as well as a decade of evidence produced through the working group process and the Office of the Independent Expert, leave no doubt that a convention is necessary. The Secretary General called on this working group to accelerate efforts to develop proposals for an international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights and dignity of older persons, and Assistant Secretary General Ilse Brand-Keres reminded us at the beginning of this session that this requires the full commitment by all member states and all stakeholders to collectively move forward. The way forward is clear. It requires action. We support calls to create a subgroup of the working group, whether a formal advisory committee or informal task group that would include experts from member states, CSOs, NHRIs, and the independent expert, to assist the working group during the intersessional period to achieve its mandate. We urge you to act on this recommendation. Any further delay puts at risk the credibility of this working group's commitment to protecting the rights of older persons. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much to the representative of Age International. And now we're going to give the floor to another NGO, Community Legal Centres of Australia, Mr. Bill Mitchell.
Señor Mitchell.
Mr. Mitchell.
I thank the chair.
Thank you.
I come to you from the country of the Wulguru and Bindal people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. As always, the way forward is influenced by where we've been and where we still need to go. So where have we been? And let's begin by considering and comparing two important decades. We now have 10 years of working group sessions, the exact same time span as we expect to create outcomes from a decade of healthy ageing. Would it be acceptable to reach the end of that decade in 2030 without tangible improvements to the health and lives of older persons? I think not. Why then have we allowed stagnation in this place? And why would we continue to forgive such inaction going forward, particularly in the light of the pandemic's obvious call to protect older persons' rights, including that supreme right of the human being, the right to life? We know that the absence of an enforceable rights framework to combat ageism has had fatal consequences for older persons around the world. In every corner of the globe, older persons have suffered and died in silence and invisibility, and we will grieve for them evermore. Even through this dreadful time, which continues still, the mandate remains unfulfilled. The 11 sessions of this group, the 2012 and 2021 analytical studies, reports of the independent expert, and many intersessional and side events have shown where we've been and what we've learned. What they cannot explain is why we are still back here, in the past, ignoring the voices of older persons. They've told you they are our voices and our rights. Older people matter. Keep our dignity. No more unequal treatment. And now, in their words, and in the end, a very simple message, it's about rights. It isn't up to us to take away that hope, that resolve, that need, and that destiny. Rather, it's our role, this group's mandate, and our collective job to answer that call. The Assistant Secretary-General for Human Rights has reminded us that the Secretary-General has leaned into the conversation for the first time, calling on this group to accelerate efforts to develop proposals. She noted the necessary demonstration of that commitment is a concrete roadmap towards the fulfilment of its mandate. So to the way forward. This session is not called the way backwards. It compels us to move towards the satisfaction of the mandate in a meaningful way. The way forward is clear. It requires immediate and decisive action. We echo the calls to create a subgroup of the working group to assist the working group during the intersessional period to finally achieve its mandate. I thank the Chair.
Thank you very much to the representative of the NGO from Australia, Mr. Mitchell. Now we're going to give the floor to the National Human Rights Institute of the Philippines, to Madam Karen Gomez-Dumpit.
Human rights of the Philippines is in solidarity with fellow national human rights institutions, civil society organizations, and older persons across the globe in the call for a binding instrument on the rights of older persons. We have witnessed the backstories behind the grim statistics of the pandemic's effect on older. They have been negatively affected by the response to quell the virus. Past persisting inequalities and discrimination have been exacerbated, and the current fragmented system will not deliver the protection needed to ensure recovery for all in this crisis. This is because gaps exist in the current human rights framework, and this has been identified in the OHCHR's analytical outcome study of the normative standards in relation to older persons. Excellencies, the way forward to strengthen the protection of human rights of older persons is to conclude a convention on the rights of older persons. Such a binding instrument provides clear baselines and standards that serve to guide the crafting of better national laws and policies. It creates monitoring, reporting, and accountability mechanisms at the national and international levels to ensure respect, protection, and fulfillment of the rights of older persons. We appeal to the open-ended working group to accelerate the progress towards the binding instrument. In this regard, we respectfully propose the inclusion of the working paper by the OHCHR in the agenda of the 12th OIGA, and the establishment of a subgroup, an advisory committee, or an informal technical working group composed of experts from member states, civil society organizations, national human rights institutions, along with experts in the UN system, led by the independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. This body may be allowed to work in intersessional meetings and assist the open-ended working group in drafting a proposed binding instrument. The Commission is closely working with the Philippine government in this way forward to ensure that no person, regardless of age, no older person, regardless of circumstances, left behind. If there is one thing that this pandemic has taught us, it is the urgency of closing the protection gap for older persons. We must seize the opportunity to address entrenched ageism. Delaying the process will not enable older persons of today to enjoy full range of human rights on an equal basis with others. Please do not make them wait any longer. Marami pong salamat.
Además, bueno.
Thank you very much to Madam Karen Gomez Dumpit. Now I give the floor to the National Human Rights Institute of Georgia, Mr. Tamar Garamadze.
Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, good evening from Georgia. I thank you for the opportunity to intervene on behalf of NHRIs of Georgia and Republic of Korea and other members of the GUNRI Working Group on Aging, including NHRIs of Poland, the Philippines, Peru, El Salvador, Nigeria, Kenya, Ecuador, and Germany. During these past 3 days, we have heard evidence-based information about the biggest challenges faced by older persons all around the world. In addition to that, this session demonstrated how the global pandemic worsened the human rights situation of older people. Let me underline that the UN Secretary General mentioned in his policy brief published in May last year, the COVID-19 pandemic has aggravated the existing challenges of older persons in terms of healthcare, the medical services, social exclusion, economic poverty, inequality, and ageism. Given the extensive support shown for this policy brief from 146 member states, we are of the opinion that the UN Working Group needs to take more decisive steps as soon as possible. Therefore, we insist on establishing a subgroup of the open-ended working group, be it a formal advisory committee or informal task group that would include experts from the member states, NHRIs, and CSOs, along with the independent experts on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. This subgroup could and should provide substantive input during the intersessional period that could be considered during the next session. In this context, NHRI colleagues welcome and support the recently released update to the 2012 outcome study on the normative standards in international human rights law in relation to older persons, which was prepared by the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. The report highlights the following, and I quote, "The existing human rights framework continues to provide fragmented and inconsistent coverage of the human rights of older persons in law and practice. Accordingly, the adoption of the dedicated international mechanism would be an effective way to bring about major changes in how the human rights of older persons are understood and protected, and thus contribute to changes in law and practices at the national level in different countries. At the same time, we insist on including the OHCHR report in the official works of Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. If we are to build a better future for the older persons after this pandemic, states must create an enabling environment by forging international and intergenerational solidarity for older persons. A binding instrument shall help ensure that the dignity of older people is upheld at all times and in all places as well. Lastly, Madam Chair, I would like to thank you, the Bureau, and the UN Secretariat for all the effort they put in organizing this meeting. However, our colleagues and HRIs from around the world had difficulties in participating in this session due to the lack of precise information and adequate procedures to register, as well as the limitation and challenges in accessing and using this Interfi platform. We would greatly appreciate if all these challenges are addressed effectively for the next session. As the working group formalized the participation of NHRIs back in 2016, we kindly ask organizers to allow NHRIs to participate independently in the working group sessions in an open and transparent manner in the future. And in addition to transparent NHRI participation, NHRIs and GANRI support and encourage the open-ended working group to ensure the most effective and active participation and NGOs in its work too. We, the whole family of NHRIs, look forward to seeing the major challenges happening in the nearest future. I thank you.
Muchas gracias a la representante.
Thank you very much to the representative of Georgia for her statement. Now we give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation, Maxim Biryukov.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Russian Federation does support international cooperation in the area of improving the life of older persons. And my country actively participates in the open-ended working group on aging, as it is one of the major discussion platforms on this topic. We support keeping the existing format of work for the working group because it provides a good opportunity for a constructive and substantive dialogue on aging, and also allows us to exchange practical information and involved in this not just the states but also experts from civil society. We think that introducing the practice of agreed recommendations into the working group is premature, given that we do not have a consensus on the very basic issues. For example, we do not even have the same understanding of what the age brackets are for older persons, and it's clear that clashing between different approaches when agreeing these documents can undermine the constructive and non-confrontational atmosphere that we've seen displayed throughout all of the meetings of the working group, not to mention even the issue of the convention, where consensus will be even harder to come by. We think that the existing international normative basis is sufficient to protect the rights and interests of the older persons, and here an important role will be played by the 2002 Madrid Action Plan. It is a key guideline in this area. It remains relevant and covers all areas of the older person's life. We therefore see no value added in adopting additional documents which would duplicate each other's provisions. We also would like to react to some of the proposals that we have heard today. In particular, we cannot support the proposal to create a subgroup which is to consist of experts and representatives of civil society. We think that the diluting of the intergovernmental nature of the group is not an acceptable thing. At the same time, we would like to note that the participation of experts and representatives of civil society in the working group currently is something that is going on very actively, and there is no need to change the modalities of the working group work, so we are not in support of this proposal. As regards the updated analytical note of the HCHR on the international standards on protecting the rights of the elderly people. Well, I'm not going to go into detail now as regards the content of this document, even though the initial analysis of the document does show that it contains numerous inaccuracies and other flaws which we will not be in a position to go along with. But our question is different. We would like to obtain additional clarification as regards the procedural grounds for its drafting. The document states that the working group asked HCHR to draft this note. But as far as we know, there were no formal decisions on that were passed by the working group. The chair of the 10th session of the working group's statement says that the states did say that they will review the analytical document by the HCR on the standards. We were not one of those in that group. So my question is, the decision for this delegate, was it made on the basis of a desire of a number of delegations? On the basis all of that, we cannot support an additional agenda item for the consideration of this document during the official meetings of the working group. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you to the Russian Federation for your intervention. We will try to respond to your questions as much as possible. Now I will give the floor to the representative of Slovenia, Spela Kosir. Spela, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Slovenia aligns itself with the EU statement. Slovenia welcomes the Secretary General's policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on older persons, which highlights the need to accelerate the efforts of this working group. We agree that the lack of a dedicated legal instrument presents a serious impediment for older persons to fully enjoy their human rights. Slovenia continues to support an outcome document that would incorporate diverse views and give a stronger and consensual mandate for our future work. We also agree that the updated analytical study prepared by the OHCHR is a good basis for our discussions in moving things forward to close the gaps. We have heard different proposals on the way forward, which we do believe merit our considerations. And we do agree that our work needs to move forward towards legally binding instrument. I thank you.
Thank you very much to the representative of Slovenia. Now I will give the floor to the representative of Peru, Mr. Eder Rojas. Madam Chair, I'd like to greet you on behalf of my delegation and greet the Bureau and the Secretariat, and also thank you for the work in preparing this session. My delegation agrees with you that the work of this working group is becoming particularly relevant in the context where we are continuing to confront the COVID-19 pandemic, which has disproportionately affected older people. This is why my country welcomes the summary the policy summary of the impact on older people of COVID-19 presented by the Secretary General, as well as the recommendation regarding ageism. Both documents, together with the discussions held during the sessions, allow us to better understand how the pandemic has put older people at greater risk of discrimination. Also, it has become clear that there's a need for responses that take into account the need of older persons, to hear their voices and make them participate in designing solutions. It's important to invest in lifelong education, digital literacy, and other areas. Madam Chair, to defeat COVID-19, international and intergenerational solidarity is more required than ever. It's important for this to have a legally binding international instrument that promotes and protects the rights and dignity of older persons. And on this point, my country has recently ratified the Inter-American Convention on the Protection of the Human Rights of Older Persons. And I'd like to mention here that the process of elaborating this regional document was very enriching and important for the participating countries. It has been very helpful in designing national policies. And on this point, Peru thinks that the work of this working group would definitely benefit from a similar exercise. This is why we would urge its participants to consider this possibility in the near future. We also support the proposal of the Argentinian delegation to have a contact group that could continue working in the intersessional period. Madam Chair, my country is strongly committed to protecting and promoting the rights of older persons, especially those who suffer discrimination and intersectional issues. And we believe that older persons play an important role in many spheres, and we would urge the international community to step up efforts to promote the inclusion of older adults. We need to lay the groundwork to build a world where no one is left behind. Only this way will we be able to ensure the sustainability of development. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, in particular, for the intervention, the delegate of Peru, and I would now like to give the floor to the delegate from China, Mr. Xiaoru Zhang.
Madam Chair, to start with, I'd like to congratulate you on successful holding this meeting. Having listened to the discussions of all parties, we found ourselves benefiting a lot. China is a consistent supporter of international cooperation on aging and the work of the working group. We wish to share the following observations. First, to approach the issue of aging from a development perspective. The issue of aging is first and foremost a development issue. Socioeconomic development has been and will always be the prerequisite of better well-being of older persons and better protection of their rights. Second, to respect differences among countries. As countries differ in national realities and levels of development, I would like to stress in particular that aging needs to be addressed by making full, sensible use of existing mechanisms and resources and taking actionable measures. Accelerated, the international community should effectively implement the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, with particular focus on the special difficulties confronting developing countries by providing them with greater financial and technological assistance. Third, China supports the working group in moving forward in an incremental way, as mandated by the GA resolutions. We've noted that divergence of opinions remains on elaborating a new international legal instrument. Therefore, it is advisable to give due respect to the opinions of all parties and conduct in-depth discussions to seek convergence step by step through a consensus-based approach. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you to the delegation of China for your statement. I now give the floor to the representative of El Salvador, Madam Mayra Sorto. Thank you very much, Ambassador and Chair of this working group. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your work. And thank the members of the Bureau and the panelists for the discussions we've had throughout these 4 days, and the excellent participation of civil society and national human rights institutions. We would like to express our support for the proposal made by Argentina to create a contact group or a subgroup to work in the intersessional period in advancing the agenda of the open-ended working group on aging, in which the civil society and other stakeholders would participate together with all member states. My country would like to also state that we believe it's important to comply with the mandate established to conclude at each session of this working group with concrete results based on contributions from all member states. This was a proposal that was agreed without any objections at the recent session of the working group. To have an outcome document starting from the next session is a logical step after 11 sessions. We don't want to once again repeat the same discussions that we've had since the beginning of this of the creation of this group. We need to move forward. Demographical trends demand it. We think it's important to have an outcome document that was already negotiated, and unfortunately we cannot adopt it at this session, but at the next session it'll have to be based on the inputs and proposals of member states, based on the momentum agreed at the 7th session of the working group, and to discuss 2 priority areas, and then to have an interactive discussion afterwards on the normative elements of the priority areas from previous sessions. With this proposal, we are actually complying with a mandate established when this group was created, and we would also be involving all member states in urging them in committing more and participating more in the discussions that take place at each session of this working group. We need the political commitment of all member states of the United Nations in order to move forward toward this goal. To have an outcome document will be an important step. It will be a contribution to other processes related to the topic of aging and the rights of older adults as part of the discussions of the 3rd Committee of the General Assembly in the Human Rights Council or other forums where this topic is discussed. So for El Salvador, it's important that at the 12th session that we have a more in-depth discussion of the how we address the rights of older persons from the local level, with the participation of local communities and local governments. As states, we have granted a mandate to this working group in paragraph 28 of Resolution 65/182. The goal was to strengthen the human rights of older persons, and bearing in mind the existing human rights framework of human rights for older persons, and while identifying possible gaps and the best way of addressing them, including by considering as appropriate the viability of other measures and instruments. So, bearing that in mind, Madam Chair, El Salvador would like to thank Argentina for its proposal, and you can count on our entire full support. We also hope to be able to negotiate and adopt an intergovernmental document at the 12th session of the working group that will be held next year. Thank you very much. We thank this intervention made by the distinguished delegate of El Salvador. I will now like to give the floor to the representative of Canada, Beatrice Mail.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam.
Pleasure to be here today. I was in Madrid actually many years ago, and it's a pleasure to be back in the open-ended working group under your leadership. As Canada expressed during the opening session on Monday, the COVID-19 pandemic is disproportionately affecting seniors. Not only as seniors, the group with the most severe cases and the highest death rate, they are also particularly affected by the various measures put in place by governments to limit the spread of the virus. As we come to the conclusion of the discussions that have taken place this week, we hear the pressing need to ensure that older persons are not left behind. With this in mind, Canada is supportive of continuing the discussion to explore current gaps on protecting the human rights of older persons. Canada remains committed to working with our international partners to build a world that leaves no one behind. That leaves no seniors behind. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Agradecemos.
Thank you to the delegation of Canada for your comment. And now I'd like to give the floor to various NGOs. We'll start with NGO Volunteers of America, Mr. Marcus DeLay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and distinguished delegates. I am pleased to present this statement on behalf of the Global Ageing Network. We recognise the meaningful contributions to this 11th session. the inputs from civil society, NHRIs, the independent expert, the UN's own report on global ageism and human rights working paper provide compelling evidence of the violations of the human rights of older people and the impact such violations continue to have, including widespread death and suffering during the pandemic period. We gratefully acknowledge the expressed position of some member states in committing support to a legally binding convention. Disturbingly, though, we have witnessed other member states express their opposition to a convention and some member states disengaged from the activities of this important working group. Our question to these member states is, what does it require for you to act, if not the evidence of what the pandemic has exposed and the evidence provided to this session, if not the preceding 10 sessions? The pandemic period did not create ageism, nor the need for a convention, but it has forced us to take action as a global community. Ageism must end now. Older people correctly demand that they age with rights. A legally binding international convention will codify the rights of older people everywhere, serving as a vital tool for both protection and empowerment. Further inaction by member states in the face of the evidence of the need for a convention is inexcusable. The notion of a subgroup or advisory group comprising experts from member states, civil society, NHRIs and the independent expert to advance work towards a convention is one we strongly support. We ask you to act on the purpose of this open-ended working group and fully commit to a process of creating and implementing a convention. We ask this in the interests of the older people of today, in the interests of the older people of tomorrow, in the interests of your future selves. Thank you.
Muchas gracias al señor Ale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Riley. Now give the floor to Red Cross of Serbia, Natasha Todorovic.
Thank you, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen. Over the past 3 days, but also over the past year, and through my work in the Red Cross of Serbia, it becomes clear that COVID-19 crisis has acted as a magnifying glass that made shortcomings and gaps in access to the human rights for older persons much more visible. I'm not talking only access to health, social protection and financial security, protection from discrimination and violence, but many other rights guaranteed to everyone regardless of their age. Furthermore, access to information, work, justice, education was very much reduced to the older persons strict by mandatory movement restriction and the digital divide. Their voice was silenced, ironically, at the same time when the society pledged to do everything in its power to preserve lives of older persons. We knew ageism existing and its high prevalence, but now we know its broad spectrum. We had nasty jokes on social networks, boomer remover, hashtags and intolerances, but we also had paternalistic, patronizing discourse by institutions and states speaking about preserving precious grandmothers' and grandfathers' lives, while at the same time never give them a chance to take part in making decisions that affect them. We must use current global crisis as a wake-up call. Human rights are only as good as they serve us in times of crisis and turmoil. But we must be aware that there are implementation gaps that can be overcome with a little more effort, but there are also normative gaps that we need to rectify by creating better policies at all levels. Protecting older persons without ever giving them a seat at the table will help no one. Human rights wise, leave no one behind means getting everyone to share both responsibility and benefits. So, way forward, or at least first step is getting the new UN Convention on Human Rights of Older Persons drafting. If we truly want to protect human rights of older persons at all levels and all settings, we must start on the bottom and listen to them, but also on the top and make a statement for all the world to hear. I thank you for both listening and deciding to speak when the time comes, and time is now. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the
Muchas gracias a la representante.
Thank you very much to the representative of the Serbian Red Cross. I wanted to just tell you that we have 10 speakers on the list, and we have to stick to our schedule and end on time. So I would really ask you to watch the time limit very carefully in your speaking, in your interventions. So I'm going to give the floor to International Longevity Center of Canada, Margaret Gillis.
Si no, intentamos con...
Mrs. Gillis, you have the floor.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Am I on?
Hello? Hello? Yes? Yes?
Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Okay.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. There are crisis moments in the history of human rights where events are so wrong, so discriminatory, and so odious that clear action is required. This last year, the world saw one such transitional event as we plunged into an unprecedented global pandemic, which resulted in unspeakable suffering and death, and sadly, the clear and profound violation of human rights, particularly those of the old. As civil society organizations prepared for the open-ended working group on aging this year, we saw that much was at stake. The ageism and age discrimination we have been detailing in the last 10 years at open-ended working groups has been laid bare in every country in the world during the pandemic. Whether it was the killing fields that long-term care became in developed countries, the skyrocketing cases of elder abuse everywhere, and the loss of the right to health when older people were denied hospital care and left to die unaided by a merciless virus, or the older people left without food or income. The global evidence of ageism and age discrimination was undeniable on every front. We quite rightly believe that action would be taken to address the human rights violations experienced by older people during the pandemic at the world's largest human rights organization, the United Nations. Over the last year, we did see some positive advances, including the Global Report on Aging and the report of the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. Less positive was the tepid response to the human rights violations experienced by older people at the open-ended working group from member states. I have to say I'm very disappointed by my own country, Canada, who, given what happened in our country in long-term care, should have a much stronger response. In the face of death and suffering and social isolation, we saw denial, minimization, and rationalization in the form of inaction at Open-Ended Working Group 11. The United Nations has been a beacon in response to egregious human rights violations, starting with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which came out of the carnage and genocide of the Second World War. Today, we need clear and decisive steps to respond to the suffering and the death experienced by older people in the pandemic, and we need a United Nations Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. We are fully and completely behind Argentina's proposal for a subgroup. We thank them for their leadership and commitment to the human rights of older persons. We hope that the words of our ambassador, Bob Ray, at ILC Canada's side events on March 30th, where he said Canada would contribute to the working group, will come to fruition. Thank you.
Agradecemos especialmente.
I would particularly like to thank Madam Margaret Gillis for her statement, and I now would like to give the floor to the representative of Chile, Carmen Nishihara. Carmen, you have the floor. Good morning, madam. Thank you for giving me the floor. Given the limit of time, I would like to say that Chile, acknowledging the existing gap in the current normative framework in the protection of the rights of older people, would like to reaffirm its commitment to move forward in developing a legally binding international document. And we like the proposal of Argentina to establish a contact group to make progress toward that goal. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the distinguished delegate of Chile. And I would now like to give the floor to the NGO International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, Madam Silvia Perel-Levin.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, madam. I'm going to speak English, excuse me.
The Bureau and all the panelists for their efforts in holding the session in very difficult circumstances and technical challenges. We are encouraged by the increasing number of NGOs attending, even though we have been largely invisible due to some unreasonable limitations imposed on our participation. We deeply regret the low participation of delegations at the interactive discussions, despite so many having supported the Secretary General's policy brief and having pledged commitment. Member states have been largely absent from this session. The OHCHR study on normative standards and several experts in the panels have provided ample, overwhelming, clear, and convincing evidence of how existing mechanisms fail to protect human rights in older age. They underscore the imperative for international legally binding instrument. The ageism that we all condemn as we witness its pervasive reach during the current pandemic has permeated this working group. Only 2 member states spoke during the interactive debate on normative elements, only 4 on the right to work. There is no justification for not doing the work mandated by General Assembly resolutions that member states endorsed. It has become apparent that the current format of this working group may not be fit for purpose. Enough is enough. We must make a significant step forward. Enough talking. Let's start drafting. Let us work together. We support the call by Argentina and the many calls to create a multi-stakeholder task group with the participation of human rights experts from member states, civil society, national human rights institutions, the independent expert on the rights of older persons, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to engage in the mandate given by the General Assembly of drafting elements for a legal instrument. We do not need consensus for such task group, but we do need responsibility, as you mentioned, Señora Presidenta. This multi-stakeholder group could meet in Geneva, where delegations have their human rights experts who participate in multiple human rights mechanisms throughout the year. This task group could focus on drafting, should and would focus on drafting a proposal for an international legally binding instrument and should present their drafts to the 12th session of the open-ended working group in 2022. Enough stalling, enough blocking. Let's start drafting a convention now. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much to the distinguished representative of the NGO, Silvia Perel-Levin. Now we're going to give the floor to Member State, Mr. Alejandro Gonzalez from Cuba. Good morning, good madam. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you very well, Alejandra. I can't see you, but I can hear you very well. Now I see you. Thank you very much, madam. We've been experiencing technical problems, and I want to thank the Secretariat and your team for the support. My delegation would like to reiterate our full support for the leadership of Argentina at the head of the open-ended working group on aging of the General Assembly. You know, Madam Chair, the unequivocal position of my country in favor of the protection of the rights of older persons, and also our understanding of the need to move towards an international regime that supports the protection of these rights of this group. And we're all going to be a member of that group one day in the future. And so the proposal that the delegation of Argentina made to have a subgroup is intersessional subgroup is an interesting proposal. We'll have to think about it. Because we do have a few doubts, procedural doubts, regarding how you intend to create such a group and what mandate it would have, what composition it would have. I have listened to a few proposals by member states and NGOs, and we would certainly study them regarding a hybrid composition of this group of governments and non-governments. Could contribute, but there's no doubt that this is a innovative proposal, and my delegation will certainly think about it, and will consult our capital. And I wanted to ask you your view, whether you've been able to think about it, just to have more clarity. How do you propose to create this group? What composition it would have? I think that would help us, that would help delegates to inform our respective capitals, because as I understand it would be a process in which we'll have to continue our discussions over the next few months, and perhaps we can have a session this afternoon, because this is a very interesting initiative, but I think we would need some more time to think about it and make a decision. And furthermore, to conclude and not to take up any more time, I would like to just insist on the fact that consensus is very important. It really, there's no value in moving forward in haste if we leave a group of states behind because they don't join consensus. Everyone is important, and there some countries that are not ready to make that step. So it's important to continue discussing, to continue working towards consensus, and is very important. And in any case, you can count on the wholehearted support of my delegation in the process we're engaged in. Once again, thank you very much for your outstanding leadership of this group in this unprecedented situation. Thank you. Thank you very much to the distinguished delegate of Cuba. And when we finish this session, we'll try to respond to some of your questions. The only thing I want to remind you that this was a proposal made by Argentina, but in fact it's been made by several delegations, and the issues: will we be able to reach a consensus? How will it be implemented? What will be the concrete measures? It should be a consensual decision, which is indeed the basis of our work, where we respect the views of everyone, and also we need to adhere to the requirements of the multilateral system. So now I would like to give the floor to another NGO, Silver Innings, Sailesh Mishra.
I thank Madam Chair from India from giving us this opportunity for submitting our viewpoint for 7 OEW on aging. Year 2020 brought us worst nightmare of COVID-19. The pandemic and the lockdown has exposed significant gaps in the protection of the right of older person. Across every region, older persons have denied their right. They were discriminated against on the basis of their age and subjected to ageist hate and stigmatization. We at Silver Inning suggest following 5 steps to be taken as a way forward to protect our older person from any further age discrimination and guarantee them their human rights. First, time to include disaster and pandemic and special attention in open-ending working group and convention on elder right with regard to right to live, right to health care, and freedom from discrimination in healthcare and rehabilitation. Second, old age care need to be made essential care services so that in the case of lockdown, curfew, disaster, pandemic, old age care is continued at home and institution. Third, convention of elder right is very much needed and cannot be avoided to deny care, security, and dignity to older person and make government of the world responsible to care for the older adult. 4. Dementia and mental health is becoming new pandemic. Madam, I request to make it part of open-ended working group and the new convention. Fifth, replace social distancing with safe distancing. We at Silver Inning demand United Nations Convention of Elder Right so that our older person can live with dignity and security. Namaste and thank you.
Thank you very much to the representative of Indian NGO. Now we're going to give the floor to Age Platform Europe, Nena Giorganzi.
Honorable Chair, distinguished delegates and colleagues. On behalf of Age Platform Europe, I would like to express our satisfaction for all the introductory statements, reiterating the importance that member states give to the human rights of older people and their willingness to make further advances. We also particularly welcome states' commitments for the broad involvement of all actors, including NGOs and NHRIs. We, however, regret that these commitments are not applied in practice. We particularly regret the low level of participation by member states in the panel discussions of the session and the lack of concrete progress towards the fulfillment of the open-ended working group mandate. Thanks to the documents prepared for this session, the updated OHCHR analytical study, and inputs by experts, we now have more than sufficient evidence that the existing standards undermine the equal protection of our human rights when we are older. They lack ambition, specificity, and impetus for change. They embody and perpetuate stereotypes and fail to guarantee to older persons the same human rights that everyone else in society has. COVID-19 obliges us to make ambitious decisions about our future. NGOs, NHRIs, and citizens who replied to the UN 75 consultation have repeatedly asked for a UN convention so that all of us are entitled to the same rights when we are older. 146 states supported the policy brief of the Secretary General, which called for accelerating efforts to develop proposals for international legal instrument. We can no longer pretend that the convention is a marginal issue that states can avoid. An outcome document is no longer enough. It is time for the open-ended working group to fulfill its mandate. We join others in calling for the creation of a subgroup that would assist the working group in its task. We also call on EU member states to review the EU position on a convention and ensure that it is informed by the views of older persons. As it was mentioned by the EU delegate, that this is important and indispensable for any future discussion on the rights. The joint EU position has not been discussed for several years, while the context since its elaboration has changed dramatically. The recent EU Council conclusions, which refer to the need to close gaps, is a step to the right direction. But there's no more time to lose. The EU must now lead the rally for a UN convention on the equal enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. Thank you.
Ok, agradecer.
I want to thank the representative of Age Platform Europe. Now I want to give the floor to Claudia Mahler, an independent expert.
Claudia, ¿está disponible?
Claudia, are you with us?
Yes, I think I'm here. Thank you so much for giving me the floor. And congratulations to this wonderful session. Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues and friends, thank you, Madam Chair, once again for your inspiring words in the opening for today's meeting. I really was encouraged by the growing political support before this session, which started with the Secretary General policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on older persons, which clearly calls to strengthen the legal framework in this respect. More than 140 states, a high number of NGOs and NHIs supported the policy brief. We were honored with the presence of the President of the General Assembly and the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, who spoke on behalf of the Secretary General and showed the relevance of our work. Right from the beginning of the opening session, we heard that the violations of the human rights of older persons have been magnified around the world during the pandemic, and this assessment was accompanied by calls that we have to move on. For example, Ilse Brandt-Carries, Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, called the open-ended working group to follow their mandate. I will not repeat the quote. This call to action was repeated for many times during the session, and I want to express my support for this idea. In this regard, I want to assure you that I will be happy to contribute to the work of a subgroup or a working group, which can have significant contributions during the intersessional period. The Madrid Action Plan is a great political tool and would benefit from a binding human rights treaty on the protection of older persons. Both instruments complement each other, which my predecessor already said a couple of times. The working paper submitted by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights is another milestone for our work. It shows that the current system is not sufficient and has its limitations to protect the rights of older persons, and this is why we need to take more decisive steps to forge the way towards an instrument which can ensure older persons the protection of their rights on an equal basis with others. I would like to reiterate my willingness for further collaboration to achieve our common goal, to strengthen the human rights of older persons, because this is the only way to realize an inclusive and age-friendly society, which is not only a vision, but a must for our future. Thank you.
Agradecemos a la experta independiente.
I want to thank the independent expert for her work, excellent work, and for her intervention. Now we have 2 member states, and then we'll come back to civil society. I just want to remind you that we only have 15 minutes left, so please really try to stick to the 3 minutes. First, Algeria. Mr. Sino Isowara.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I would like to thank you and all members of the Bureau for the way you are handling the work of our group. I will be very brief. When it comes to the proposal of creating intersessional subgroups, even if the ideas seem appealing, we still need to consult more in our region and to seek more instructions with capital in order to be able to support that process. The same goes for adding a new agenda item to support the working paper prepared by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We need more time to go in depth analyzing this updated document. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Gracias a la
Thank you to the representative of Algeria. Now give the floor to another member state, Morocco. You have the floor.
Good morning. Do you hear me, Madam Chair? Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. And first of all, thank you very much for your able leadership going through this session, which was not easy, actually, if we see the context of when this session is being programmed in the schedule of the UN, it's quite difficult. I'm just now on the spot thinking of maybe we should to think carefully about changing the programming of this session from this very specific tight program of work for all delegates, because we just had an extremely difficult CSW session, and now there are negotiations of trafficking in human being, negotiations of African descent process, the CPD as well. So it's quite really challenging to follow different things at the same time, whereas this session, and as Morocco has always been saying, even in the past, the specific item on aging is very important. Maybe for political reasons, but maybe there is also a humane issue, which is older persons cannot wait. Saying that just quickly, Madam President, this is to fully support the open-ended working group on aging. We have expressed that in our national statement and also in other fora, and also in one side event with ILC Canada and other distinguished colleagues from the civil society. Madam President, the idea, I'm taking the floor also about the idea of the advisory group. I think it's a positive idea. It's a very positive step forward. And Morocco would support every initiative that is going to bring something, an added value, a positive. Just one small question, and I would join also other colleagues in requesting, of course, additional information, because it's not at our level here in New York that things decided to be decided. It's our capitals, but of course we can always send that positive feedback, a positive appreciation if we have more information, of course, especially about its composition and I was going to speak in French, and especially also the timeline of its objectives. Because what we believe, Madam Chair, is that we don't want to have another group bis, group ter, group quarter, another additional groups that the ideas will be sinking. We would like something concrete to move forward. Whether we want this convention or no, whether we want it yes or no, we need something. But because other persons cannot wait, and I think that for the 7 years here I've been here in New York, every year the same kind of quote unquote frustration, maybe kind of we want this, but we need something concrete. So hopefully that this advisory group, after Madam Chair you send us the information, would bring some change, would clarify, at least for member states, what path to take and move forward. I think I wanted to speak more about the substance, but I think that my delegation made the statement in its national capacity. Also another important, as I said, side event by Canada and ILC Canada, where we expressed more information. So I talked also about the idea of thinking of the reprogramming of this session, not tie it with other processes taking place at the same time. Yes, so maybe if I miss something else, I will write it in the chat. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and congratulations on your able leadership. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much to the delegation of Morocco. I now give the floor to... We have 4 NGOs left. 3, sorry. International Federation on Aging, Ms. Frances Zinoidian. Frances, you have the floor.
Thank you. Distinguished delegates and fellow advocates for the rights of older persons, my name is Frances Zinoidian, representing the International Federation on Aging. We have all aged 10 years since the open-ended working group first met in 2011. Close to 800 documents have been submitted for this body's deliberations. The General Assembly on numerous occasions has requested the working group to present proposals and measures that will contribute to promoting and protecting the rights and dignity of older persons. Where are those proposals? The latest request from the General Assembly in its resolution 74-125 and 75-152 was for this body to consider adopting intergovernmentally negotiated recommendations. Where are they? The working group has failed to comply with those General Assembly mandates, and more importantly, it has failed older people everywhere. The inability of this body to move forward to a different stage and level of discussions begs the question about not only the process, but also to what degree does this inaction reflect the working group's ageist attitudes. 146 member states indicated their support for the Secretary General's policy brief on the impact of COVID on older persons. What specific actions have they taken or will be taken by those member states to accelerate the work of the working group? During the past 10 years, older people have died because their rights have not been protected or respected, with current national legislation either being absent or inadequate. An update of the 2012 report prepared by OHCHR on gaps in normative standards in human rights law is now available. What else will it take to convince member states that we are addressing an issue of human rights, not just an issue of medical rehabilitation and social welfare? Aging is not a problem. Ageism is the problem. Ageism is a prejudice against our future selves. Denial of the rights of older persons implies that a significant portion of humanity does not matter. At the United Nations, international action is considered necessary when national action is inadequate. An international convention would recognize older persons as rights holders, would establish a common global understanding of definitions and minimum standards of practice, would act as an anti-discriminatory tool, and would improve state accountability and transparency everywhere, not just in a few countries, everywhere. We therefore fully support Argentina's proposal for the establishment of a subgroup comprised of experts from member states, the independent experts, CSOs, NHRIs, to assist the working group to achieve its mandate. Let us move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To the NGO who just spoke. Now I give the floor to another NGO, Nsindajiza organization, Eli Mugabowishema.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we first commend the great decision of the UN General Assembly 10 years ago, establishing the open-ended working group on aging to strengthen the protection of the human rights of other people. Other people are denied the right to quality health services, right to lifelong learning, training, and capacity building, access to finance, life and health insurance, access to work, and to participation. It has been said
Bueno, hay un problema.
Well, there's a technical problem with Ellie. So we have very little time left. We're going to move to the World Health Organization, Alana officer. Alana, and then we'll try, if we have time left, to come back to Ellie. Alana, you have the floor.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the Bureau, distinguished delegates. On behalf of the World Health Organization, I want to make 3 points. The first point is on the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, 2021-2030, which was declared on December 14th by the UNGA. The decade is an important strategic opportunity to also strengthen the protection of the human rights of older persons. It must be used. The decade focuses on improving the lives of older people, their families, and their communities, and focuses on 4 priority areas, all of which have multiple intersecting human rights. Changing how we think, feel, and act towards age and aging, building communities that enable the abilities of older people, delivering person-centered integrated care, and providing older people access to long-term care. These actions are supported by enablers around voice and engagement, building capacity and leadership, connecting stakeholders, and data research and innovation. These all need to be delivered with a human rights-based approach. The decade can both improve protection of the human rights of older persons and also be used to inform discussions on the gaps in existing frameworks on the human rights of older persons. For example, the recent baseline report for the decade identifies that progress has been made in a lot of areas, but strengthening legislation and enforcement against age-based discrimination is not one of them. Corrective action is needed if we're going to achieve the indicators for 2030. The second point concerns the global campaign to combat ageism. We've heard that COVID-19 has unveiled how widespread ageism is in our society. Ageism is the principal cause of human rights violations based on age. On March 18th, the UN released the first global report on ageism and kicked off a global conversation on this topic. The report outlines that 1 in 2 people in the world are ageist against older people, that ageism has serious impacts on health, well-being, and survival, and costs our societies billions of dollars. The report gives evidence on what works to combat ageism: education, intergenerational contact, and policy and law. The report outlines progress that has been made in policy and law and highlights the gaps at the international level. The OHCHR study also highlights specific gaps. The way forward must consider these 2 reports. The third point I want to make is that in light of COVID and its impact on health, well-being, and survival of older persons, please consider the right to health as a substantive topic for discussion at future meetings. Madam Chair, thank you very much. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por su...
Thank you very much for your intervention. We're going to try to go back, if the interpreters allow me, to go back to Mr. Eli from the NGO Sindajiza organization. Let's try to see if we can connect with him. It appears that we are not able to get in touch with him. Well, we basically just 1 minute to conclude our meeting. I want to thank all of you. And in the afternoon, we'll try to, the chair will try to respond to the questions. It's a process. It's something that is, we're in the process of kind of, we're going at, we are working as we go. So I don't have all the answers. We're going to continue discussing and seeing how we can move on to take more concrete actions to help our older adults. So I want to thank all your interventions. They've all been very, very enriching, very useful. There have been some very valuable and there's a lot of diversity which really enriched the work of this group. We're going to we're going to meet at 3 p.m. This time we'll be actually meeting in the room of the General Assembly, so it won't be virtual. We'll see you there at 3 p.m. Thank you.